This is one of the games that everyone is talking about right now. So there's a series of games played by Hans Niemann in the last couple of years which are being analysed very closely in the wake of everything going on. Now I'll give you a bit more information on that one at the end of this video, but first I want to show you this game, which for me is the most beautiful of all of these games, so that you can take it on face value, and then I'll get to the other piece going on around this game. So let's see what happened. Hans had black here, and he was playing against Mishra with white, who by the way was the youngest chess grandmaster ever at 12 years and 4 months. Now this was played just before Mishra became a GM, so this is in October 2020, 2 years ago, and both players, as you can see, were weaker rated then, but up and coming fast, and their ratings have exploded since then, especially Hans Niemann's. So let's see what happened here. So we had e4 from Mishra, e5 from Hans, and we go down the standard opening moves of the Italian game, knight f6, d3, and now here you see a lot of bishop c5 being played, also bishop e7, but we had h6 from Hans, and this has a very aggressive idea which I'm drawing on the board here. And by the way, I love this about the chess.com analysis board. You can pre-draw the arrows you want to show in the moves before the game is played. You can't do that on Lead Chess, which I've been analysing with a lot recently. So Hans wants to go g5, get an aggressive kingside attack going, as we'll see. So c3 played, Mishra just carries on as normal, d6, and now the castle's kingside comes, and g5. Hans is just going for it. I love this opening system, by the way. I'll have to try this one. So the knight carried on with development. g4 was now played, and now Fabiano Caruana was analysing this game. I was watching that podcast, and he mentioned here that the knight has to drop back. You can't come to h4, or then you're running into this tactic, opening up the queen and winning a pawn. Although interestingly, the engines show that white's actually doing quite well if you now go pawn to f4, for the reason being that if you capture en passant or on f4 here, you're going to rip open that f-file in a very dangerous way when your king hasn't yet castled. So best here is bishop to e6, but then white can ruin the structure. Now they can open the f-file anyway. Knight f6 check is coming. If you take with the knight here, you've also got queen a4 check. This is really bad for black here. So that would have actually been a nice shot if you'd gone down this route. You can go knight h4, it would seem. But knight e1 was played, more human looking move unless you know all the tactics, and now we had pawn h5, supporting that pawn some more, and also just getting this pawn storm going against the king. So f4 was now played, very logical, and here we had takes on f4. You could go queen e7, bishop d7, castle queenside already, just rapidly develop, but then white could go f5, shut down your attack a bit. So okay, Hans takes on f4, the rook recaptures, and bishop to h6. He really keeps this initiative going now. So the rook drops back, now he goes queen to e7, and now here it's really tough for Mishra to actually play and find good moves. I mean, if you look at this knight, it's got nowhere to jump to. This one is boxing in the bishop, this knight here, whoops. So that one kind of needs to get out of the way to free up the bishop. You can't go d4, the e4 pawn is weak. So that explains this knight to b3 move, looking to exchange these pieces, but all the pieces are kind of on top of each other here for white. Because now knight e5 was played by Hans, good move, targeting this bishop, and you can't actually save it, keep it on the board. If you check here, for example, c6, if the bishop drops back, b5 actually traps it. So the pieces are a bit on top. Now we had an exchange here, rook recaptures, and the knight drops back. So it looks a bit weird from Mishra, but he's covering this one to avoid doubled pawns, and at least now he's exchanged off that dark squared bishop, got one of those underdeveloped pieces out of its box. So bishop d7 from Hans. At the right moment he wants to castle queenside. The bishop tucked back to b3 here, and now pawn g3 was played by Hans. He's just absolutely going for the white king here. So pawn h3 was now played, and here we see a fantastic move, really going for the throat. Very difficult to find, but do pause if you want to look for it. Guess what the most attacking and best move in the position is here. So the move played was knight f to g4. Beautiful stuff. You have to go with that knight because it opens up the queen now to come into these dark squares. So you can't capture this, or after recaptures, you're simply getting mated with the arrows drawn on the board. These pawns just boxing the king plus its own pieces, that's just deadly. So you can't take. Queen e2 was played to cover this knight jump into e3, forking queen and rook. And now this is where Hans just comes up with an exceptional idea. Again, you can't just play too slowly here and castle queenside, because this time d4 comes, kicks back this knight, and now the rook crashes through on f7, supported by the bishop. White's now attacking black, doing very well. So you have to play with initiative. Hans jumps this knight into h2. And what's really beautiful about this position, as I'm drawing on the board here, is that rook has got literally no squares where it can't be taken by a black piece. So instead we had this queen nudging to e3, but this is the thing where you have to calculate deeply, because that now hits the unprotected rook. And if you take here, well, white takes here. Now you can play this way, but in this position it's roughly level. Black's no longer slightly ahead, as we see in the variation that Hans plays. But this was perfectly plausible as a continuation. Instead, the rook saves itself, comes back here, covers this pawn, but this is really deep insight, because now the white rook can save itself, and this black knight looks awful, trapped out of the game, can't get back in, so it's strategically very risky, because if the knight stays blocked out of the game, you'll be struggling. So the pawn is now attacked, it was defended with h4, now d4 came, kicked that knight finally, it hopped back into g6, hitting the rook, and the rook once again has literally got no squares to retreat to. So instead the knight developed to d3, but Hans doesn't capture just yet. He holds off on that one. He castles the king, finally. This rook came to the e-file. Hans did the same. He's in no rush to pick up this rook. Now pawn e5, breaking through. This is where white's hopes lies, getting through to the king, playing in the centre, and now Hans chops on f4. The knight recaptured, and there's big initiative here now for Mishra, because he's coming into d5 with that knight, so c6 was played to cover that one, but now this critically weakens the d6 square, so knight c4 pounces on that one, and there's nothing black can do to avoid that knight hopping in with check. So d5 was played, best move. Yes, it forces the knight in, but then you get this tactical sequence. Whoops, that's my phone. Silence that one. Then you get this tactical sequence, so you chop off, the pawn recaptures, now you take here, so you've given back the exchange now, rook recaptures, and this is an absolutely critical move now from Hans. He has to activate this rook, or else he's kind of playing a rook down and a knight down, so he goes rook to h6, and this sets up a stunning mating idea, because you're threatening to come to f6, hitting this knight, which can't be defended by the rook, and then after the knight moves, you checkmate on f1 here. So the knight hops back, preempting that one, and Mishra probably expected something like this, takes on d6 as a blunder, or maybe he hoped for it, but then white can take on g3. Pawn recaptures, rook takes, and white's completely winning because the knight's got no retreat squares here. But we didn't have this takes on d6. Instead, Hans goes rook to e6 here, so he's forcing these rooks off the board. Bishop recaptures, and we now reach this really interesting position where the white king is completely boxed in, as I'm showing here, so that one can't participate, but then black doesn't have a knight playing in the game. So here we had bishop to c2, stops the bishop from activating to that long diagonal, which is desirable. Now king d7, knight f4, Hans picks up this pawn, and b4 now played by Mishra. And Hans now plays a slightly strange move. I mean, there's a couple key plans here. One is to go king e7, f6, bring it round, all this kind of thing. Try and swap the bishops or get the f-pawn going. I mean, if you can ever kind of march the king in, it's going to be really dangerous against these pawns. It will be superior to this knight. And the other key plan here is to somehow bring the bishop round to this diagonal where it can then support the knight's escape. But b5 is a bit strange because it of course squashes that kind of bishop plan, but then Mishra goes a4. It is actually one of the top computer moves, interestingly. It's a tough position for white. Hans can capture, and now he does have a route in with his bishop to a6. So he starts with bishop f5, This one goes to b3. You'd like to come here, but the knight covers that square. So bishop back. There's a bit of a shuffle now. The players are coming up to time control, but now Hans comes around. So bishop d1 played. Important move, because when the bishop comes here, threatening to free the knight, now this one blocks. We had captures, knight recaptures, and now king to e6. So knight c1 played. It's coming round to try and gather these pawns. f5 from the king. Knight b3, king e4, and after knight a5, this is where the f-pawn now gets rolling. So it's coming all the way down the board. Mishra gets his pass pawn going, or at least it could be a pass pawn soon. f3, you have to take, or you're about to get mated in just a moment. And after captures, knight takes, we see king to f1 here. If you come to g2, by the way, well, then we check here. King goes, knight d3 now is important. You don't go to g3, by the way, or then the king steps up here, and it covers pawn, covers knight, covers your king invasion, not good. So the knight comes to d3 here. This is the key move. And now if this knight takes here to get the b pawn rolling, well, then the king marches in. This one goes, check. And actually, we're bringing the knight round to checkmate the white king. This could be one sample finish. Let me turn the engine off. It's actually making everything lag. Okay, there we go. So king g2 not played. Instead, king f1. Now we had knight hopping back, looking to pick up this pawn. And now Mishra comes back with the knight here. Again, if he chops, he's just too slow after this kind of sequence. You're getting mated once again. So that's why he brings the knight back. Now knight takes on h3, knight g6, coming after this pawn, but this is a nice finishing sequence. So g2 check, king's forced to take, now you check, you force the knights off the board, and because the king has to come and clean this one up, well, black mops these ones up, and this is just a winning pawn endgame. Here Mishra resigned, this one's going through way too fast. So a fascinating game from Hans Niemann. Really the key moment, if we just rewind it here, was actually leaving the knight boxed into the corner. So in this position here, when queen e3 was played, so knight h2, queen e3, you've now got this opportunity to get the knight out of the box. Queen takes, you have something like this, it's roughly level. So this decision to leave the knight on h2, go rook h7, let the rook escape, leave this one stranded was strategically very risky, but absolutely correct as the game showed. Beautiful, deep insight from Hans. So why is this game in the spotlight right now? Well, this is the reason. So this video here was put up by this lady, Yosha Esheks is her channel. So she's a French lady, FIDE master from France, and she was looking at these games which show a strong rate of play in Hans's play, basically, when you analyse back a couple years or something. I mean, do check out the video for yourself if you want to. Fabiana Caruana did a reaction on it, Hikaru Nakamura as well. So people have been looking at this stuff, speculating, etc. Once again, it's completely circumstantial evidence, all of this stuff. From what I can personally see, from what I'm seeing in these videos, I'm not seeing anything kind of statistically concrete, pulled together, also compared with other top players. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it seems very circumstantial to me right now. So I'd want to see this in the light of other evidence from other strong players, and not just the historical stuff she pulls out. And yeah, like I said, this is just one lady pulling together some stuff. It really needs to be done thoroughly. But it's kind of classic of the times right now. Because in chess, and Maurice Ashley talked about this, we don't have this kind of governing body just overseeing the formal process behind cheating accusations. And you've got different players, chess.com, chess24, you've got FIDE themselves, who have their own kind of procedures around governing anti-cheating and everything. Because you don't have any kind of central board, central procedures just overseeing this stuff, it's very much just like people doing their own investigation now, trying to figure stuff out, all kind of incoherent and a bit messy. So it's pulling the chess world into this public spotlight right now. But whether it's doing it in such a helpful and healthy way for the game, I'm not really sure. But hopefully it at least gets us talking about cheating and helps us stamp out the problem, and maybe brings more people towards chess. Anyway, just my tuppence on this whole thing. Thanks very much for watching as always. Do hit that subscribe button if you never want to miss a future video, and check out the videos on screen if you haven't yet seen them to get more up to speed with everything that's going on lately. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.